let's get started. I'm going to start by sketching out the window shape and kind of getting an idea for where it will go, and then I'll be using my pen and then finally start painting. So this first window that I'm going to make is kind of an arched window. So I wanted to take up a good amount of the paper, but I'm also going to do some, what are they called? Shutters. So I'm going to leave a little bit of room for that. So I'm just loosely sketching in, knowing that I will be using my pen to make the final lines, so making it kind of tall and skinny. Thinking about composition, I want it fairly centered. This feels a little bit higher than down here, so I'm going to make it a little bit longer just to make sure it feels more in the middle. I am going off of a reference photo, but as I go, I want it to fit on my paper. So already I'm making it longer and skinnier than the photo I'm looking at. So remember that when you work from a reference, you do not have to follow a reference in the exact same way. Now my window shutters are kind of match the shape of the window since it's a curved window. I'm going to make my shutters the same shape, so if they closed, it would actually cover up the window. So I'm kind of starting with this reverse curve of the window shape, and then a straight line and same direction as the base of the window. My window reference has some different wood pieces that kind of attach to these shutters to piece them together. So I'm going to be sketching that in with kind of some framing that's in this nice, it's got the diagonal line at the top to kind of mimic the curve that's at the very top. So I really like that detail. As with anything, you can change it and make it your own as we go. If you have other windows you enjoy seeing, I'll be doing lots of different window drawings and paintings in this series, but even with just this first one, you can make it your own. Hopefully I'm just here to teach you different techniques and fun things to learn. One thing I noticed with the details on the windows is that the wood that was pieced together to make it is in pieces. And so I'm gonna make these sides actually be a long section of wood, and then I'll add some little like nail dots and things like that inside. Now my window is set into the wall a little bit, so I'm going to put another shape. I'm gonna kind of create a parallel shape or copy the shape on the inside here, and then use a few lines to actually set it back. So kind of connect these corners. This is more like a ledge now, and I might set a kind of basket of flowers or a window box kind of sitting in on here. Since I don't know what flowers I'm going to do yet, I'm going to leave that kind of open and probably add pen at the end with the flowers. But I'm going to go ahead and do the actual window panes. I'm going to be making these window panes symmetrical, so I'm starting by dividing this window shape in half, and then I like to kind of sketch out where each of the frames will go, and then I'll go and I'll actually make the panels with my pen, just because it's a pain to make them every single one. So I'll show you what I mean. First, I'm just kind of dividing up how many there are going to be. This one has a lot of small panels. Then when I actually use my pen, what I'll do is I'll go on the inside of all these like this, and I'll erase this center line. So I end up with actual framed little panels instead of just a thin line. So I can actually paint in the shapes if I do it that way. I think there's going to be a little bit of, well, I'll do that with my pen too. Okay, I think I do want to add a few like stones kind of around it. So I'm going to do this kind of arch over the top and do a nice keystone where it's kind of diagonal, and then maybe just a few other brick stone pieces there and something similar at the bottom. Make sure one is kind of centered, and then I'll just divide those up. And that way it's got that symmetrical feeling all across it. Okay, now it's time to go over it with my pen. I'm not worried too much about exact straight lines. It's kind of fun when it's loose and sketchy. So I'm just gonna trace the lines I wanna keep. Any lines I don't wanna keep, I can erase when I'm done. Whenever I'm outlining, I look for other things I can do with my pen, like adding texture. I decided to add some wood grain texture while I was there with the different planks of wood on the window shutters. Okay, I've gone over and outlined all the lines I want to keep. Now I'm going to erase what I don't want, which is all the pencil lines. I chose to not draw details in the flower box, so I can do that with paint, and then I'll trace those at the end. So now I'm going to erase. Now it's time to paint it. I love when old windows have really bright, pretty colors. So I'm going to start with some light values of just bright colors, especially for these window shutters. I think that'll look super fun. if they're a bit brighter than what I would expect. Normally when I paint things, especially landscapes and nature, I like to mute my colors to make them look more realistic. However, when we're painting something man-made, we can use bright colors and that will look beautiful. Plus, people love bright shutters on houses, at least I do. So I think I'll choose to do that for mine. If you did want to mute it, you would choose a little bit of an opposite color to mix with it. So if I do want to just tone down a few pieces, I'm gonna grab a little bit of this orange and just kind of drip that in a few little locations, maybe following the grain. And already that's making it look a little more worn and torn, which is great. I think that makes it, gives it an antique look. That was tricky to say, while still using that really bright blue. So even when we're using bright colors, we can still use our techniques of muting it, knowing our color wheel and knowing our complementary colors, because complementary colors create brown when mixed together. And the complementary color to blue is orange because they are opposite on the color wheel. So by using those opposites, I can mute or I can bring my colors kind of closer to the center of the color wheel, if that makes sense, which makes them a little bit more muted. I like to do a lot of my color mixing on my paper if I can, because then it provides more variety. It makes me see all the colors. Instead of mixing it ahead of time and only seeing the one mixed color, I get to see the color that I added as well as the color that was already on the paper. So it's kind of a fun, easy trick to make more variety happen, is just by only mixing your paint, or at least trying to do a lot of your color mixing on the actual paper itself. All right, I'm gonna save my window panes for last because I think I'll make them dark, maybe. Actually, I'm undecided about those, but I do think I'm gonna do the actual like frame of the window pretty light, just like a very off-white. So I'm gonna really water down my orange and just very carefully go around, not really worrying too much about getting some paint on the actual window panes, because I will paint those something once I decide. But I just want to give the tiniest bit of color to the actual like wooden window frame that can open and close, that actually you can see through, that has the glass. So tiny bit of color for it. I also can put this tiny color right down where flowers might go, because it's so light the flowers can cover it up and that won't be a problem. Okay, I'm gonna do kind of a brighter of the same orange for this plant pot, this plant bucket planter thing, and just get that saturated. Maybe a little darker at the bottom, or maybe a little darker where there'll be some plants hanging over. Just thinking in advance. All right, now plants. I'm gonna get a little bit of some green leaves, but I'm gonna leave some spaces open for some flowers. So I'm randomly dotting kind of around circular shapes, leaving some of those open so I can put some bright colors inside. I've got this pretty purple on my paint palette today that I think I'm gonna use for the flowers. So I'm just gonna kind of drip that into some random shapes. Again, I'll use my pen at the end to go back and really turn these into flowers. But for now, I'm just suggesting where there might be some flower-ish shapes. All right, this is going nice and easy and quick. I'm gonna mix a little bit of this orange with a little bit of black to make it a little bit of just a darker brown color, and do this inside of my window part. This part that kind of should be in shadow because it's indented, it's pushed back into the wall. And one thing I should do but didn't just do was I like to hold my paintbrush so that my bristles are pointing at the edge I want to be most careful. So I'm pointing at the edge of my window because I've already painted that, and it's so light I don't want to cover it up. If I get some of my blue, that can be covered up more easily, whereas here I got some of my little tan and that's gonna be harder to get off. Not impossible, but just harder. So if I can help it, I like to aim my brush at the edge that I really don't want paint on, because I have more control over the tip of my brush than I do the side of my brush. So if I lean it too much, I might get paint somewhere I don't want it. So that's where, of course, turning your paper or turning your brush comes in handy, so you can really control where your paint goes. Now I should be thinking of shadows as well, so maybe I'm gonna make the top a little bit darker than what the bottom will be, because that's really what would be in shadow, especially if I'm thinking of, you know, regular daylight. So I'll fade that out to the sides. I'm working mainly with just wet on dry for this painting because it's kind of like a coloring book. I'm not worried too much about the paints mixing in a special way. I'm just having fun kind of placing them where I want them to go. And then I'm using a little bit less black in this mixture, maybe a little more than what I did, but I'm trying to make it lighter than the sides, again, to play with that idea of where the shadow might be. And this is where the light would be hitting, is this base where the flower is sitting. And so I want to keep that edge a little bit lighter than the sides. All right, I'm gonna do some brick work. I think I'm gonna do some more of this orange. I like this orange for the bricks. I'm just gonna go ahead and do the whole shape with orange. And then while it's wet, I'm gonna just dab in a little bit of the black to kind of create the texture. So here is a wet on wet technique. So kind of along the edge, maybe along the bottom, a little bit random in the middle. And since it's wet on wet, that color should just mix in kind of its own fun way and create a bit more of a texture in that stonework. So I'm gonna do that again. I like to do it with just a few stones at a time, otherwise it does dry too quickly and then it won't have the same effect. So I do a few, make sure I can paint them while they're still wet, and that way that effect will work the most. If they do dry too fast, you can just get that whole area wet again with the paint, and then you'll be able to do that same mixture. So here those colors are having a chance to play and run together. I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing for these stones at the bottom. All right, I've been thinking about my window panes, and I think I'm going to do a very, very watery light blue to make it look like shiny glass. And so to do that, I'm gonna try to leave little bits of white lines kind of diagonally. Oops, that's too blue. If it's ever too blue, just wash your brush off and use plain water to kind of spread around what's there already. So if I can, I'm leaving a little bit of white showing as like a reflection. So I'm really not painting these super neatly. I'm obviously trying to stay on the window pane, but other than that, I'm just kind of going in a diagonal direction and trying to skip the middle. So I get a little bit of a white diagonal line. Okay, now I'm gonna go back to my flowers now that they have dried, and I'm going to just use my pen to show kind of where they are, maybe trace around the kind of clumps and give them a little bit of a hard edge. My leaves, I might kind of actually draw some leaf shapes over wherever the green areas are and just define that there are actual leaves or vines kind of hanging out with the flowers. Really, some little scribbles will go a long way, so don't think too hard about it. You're just kind of using the shapes you created to give yourself a place to start. And then I want to make sure I think about like where this ends and where other things begin. So if I needed to add a window pane back in there, if I decided my flowers didn't go as far as I wanted them to, then I would add that back in. But otherwise, I am finished with this window project. I hope you painted along with me. If not, give it a try at some point soon and have so much fun creating this joyful little cute window. And then check out episode 2 for more and more window painting as we do this cute series together. See you next time.